Mr. Charles Pierce.
Today is Sunday. The date is April the 1st, 1962. The time is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm in the Fort Lauderdale home of Mr. Charles Pierce at 1717 Middle River Drive. Mr. Pierce, there are so many things about Palm Beach and Palm Beach County that you know that I'd be here for 3 or 4 days, and I know you don't have that much time, but I do know that you are the son of one of the Barefoot Mailmen, and supposing we start in that vein, how did the Barefoot Mailmen come into existence?
Well, the Barefoot Mailmen came into existence, Mr. Hughes, as a means of better communication between the Miami area and the Palm Beach area. The only means of communication by way of transmitting mail before the establishing of the Barefoot Mailmen was a very devious route, and I might, if you'd been interested, I might give you that route because it's most interesting, having to do with what goes on in the early days. When a man wrote a letter in Palm Beach to a man in Miami, the letter took this route. It went from Palm Beach up to Jupiter on a little railroad called the Celestial Railroad, from Jupiter up the Indian River to Titusville by steamer, from Titusville across to Palatka. Now, we're still writing a letter from Palm Beach to Miami, bear in mind.
We've gone north and west so far.
And then from Palatka up to St. Johns River to Jacksonville.
Oh, no.
Still heading for Key West, for Miami from Palm Beach. Then from Jacksonville across to Cedar Keys on the little railroad known as the JT and KW, Jacksonville, Tampa, and Key West Railroad. The Key West comes into it by reason of the fact that from Cedar Keys, the western terminus, you then got on a schooner, and went to Key West. And then from Key West came up to Miami. Now, you don't wonder that they applied for a better means of communication.
Did it sail up from Key West to Miami?
Oh, yes. It was all by sail. Bear in mind, in those days, there was very little steam.
Yeah.
And this was except for these Indian River stern wheelers. But the way the communication by mail, so they applied for a better means of communication and established this so-called barefoot mail route.
And your father was one of those who...
by accident,
oh,
yes.
By accident.
By accident. There was a mail carrier by the name of Hamilton on the route that my father and Mr. Garnett in Hypoluxo. These two men had gone personal bond for this mail carrier. The type bond they went was that if the man didn't carry the mail, they would. And this boy was not too familiar with the area, and he was more or less of a newcomer, and he attempted to swim Hillsborough Inlet. And something got him. And they found his clothes and his mail sack on the banks of Hillsborough Inlet, but Hamilton was lost. And thusly, my father and Mr. Garnett, having gone so-called performance bond for him,
Had to make good.
They had to make good. And so they walked the beach alternately from the Palm Beach to Miami. And of course, the reason that it was called the Barefoot Mail Route was the easiest place to walk was in the firm sand just above the wash of the surf. And the mailman would take off his shoes and tie them together and hang them around his neck, and he would walk the beach. The country there.
Now, this business of walking that beach, I tried it once. I decided I would walk from Miami to West Palm Beach.
Really?
Oh, yes. And I walked from Miami to the inlet at Port Everglades.
Great Scott.
And by that time, I was completely lopsided
I
and
don't
ready
wonder.
for the chiropractor.
I don't wonder.
I don't know how they ever achieved a gait that permitted them to do that.
Well, I've often talked to my father about that, and they seem to have set a moderate speed, and they just had it figured out. It took them 3 days to go down.
From Jupiter to Miami.
Yes, but they didn't walk all the way from Jupiter. You see, they sailed. They could sail down Lake Worth, and down to where Boynton Inlet is now. There they'd leave their boat, and there they'd start walking, and they'd walk from there to where the Baker's Haulover is now. And there they'd pick up their boat and sail down the mouth of the Miami River.
Oh, I see.
So the actual beach walking was not as far as it sounds, and yet it was as a fellow says, a right good piece of beach walking at that.
Well, now let's see. In those days, were there were other inlets to cross?
There were inlets to cross, and they got across those in small boats. They kept a boat, and the reason that this man Hamilton lost his life was the fact that now and then there'd be a wandering soldier come up from the Miami area or a beach tramp, and somebody had carried the boat across. Well, now these boys that knew the area, when that thing happened, they didn't attempt to swim it. There was always lots of driftwood on the beach, and they would make a raft and get themselves across that way. But this young man was a strong swimmer, and saw no reason why he shouldn't swim it. And
well, now, what did they do at night? Did they camp out?
No, they stopped. They tried to make these houses of refuge now, established along the coast. I don't know whether anybody's told you about them or not. But
well, the only one I know is the one in Martin County.
Well, there were a series of them. There was one here at Fort Lauderdale, the New River House of Refuge. There was one up about Delray called the Orange Grove House of Refuge. And there was one at north end of Biscayne Bay called the Biscayne House of Refuge, about where the haulover is now. And they would make those places for their overnight stops.
Were they stocked, those places?
Oh, yes, those were stocked and fully manned. My grandfather was a keeper of the Orange Grove House of Refuge and also the Biscayne House of Refuge. Matter of fact, my aunt, Mrs. Voss, was the first girl child born on the lower East Coast, and she was born, I think, at the Orange Grove House of Refuge, either the Orange Grove House of Refuge or the New River House of Refuge here. They were well stocked and well maintained, a government facility. You see, the coastline was so long and so barren. There was no civilization at all. And most of the sea traffic, when this House of Refuge chain was established, was by sail. And there's an inshore current that sets in off here in January, February, March that set these boys on the beach. And they used to come in here and lots of them come ashore. And those shipwrecked sailors, there was nothing between here and Jacksonville. Titusville was way back inland, so nothing on the beach proper. So that was the reason for the establishment of these houses of refuge.
Now, the Barefoot Mailman walking the beach, was there no inland waterway as such?
None. And there was no place to walk. It was all jungle. And this narrow strip along the beach was the only high area. All back of that was swamp or little high spots here and there, but the only real place to walk would have been along the beach ridge as such, or down just above the water where the sand was good and firm.
Now, I've heard that occasionally they had company. Somebody want to
Yes,
go?
at the price of $5 a trip. That sounds ridiculous, but the country was so wild that they used to pay, and my father often laughed about an Irishman that went along with him, and I've forgotten his name now, that paid him $5 for the privilege of walking on the trip and griped all the way down about his $5. They had little places they knew to stop. Now, for instance, up here just north of Boynton, between Boynton and Delray, there were some caves, rather large caves back in the beach. And they used to stop in there and get fresh water, and that was one of their stopping places, which they had to come back off the beach and back into the jungle, into one of these caves.
I can just see one of these out-of-condition dudes walking that beach.
Yes.
The mailman must have carried him most of the way.
I would think so. The mailman, that mail route, of course, has been one of the romantic things that have happened down in this area. I think Ted Pratt, in his book, The Barefoot Mailmen, has done so much to publicize it. Ted got a great deal of his information from me and from my father's manuscript in writing his book. As a matter of fact, his character in there is called Pearton, which is a combination of Pierce and Hamilton, the boy that lost his life. And they did it. My father and Mr. Garnett did it for about 6 months until this young man's year had run out, and then someone else took it on, and shortly thereafter they got a better means of communication. In connection with communication, I might tell you, if we have time, about the stagecoach line. Has anybody told you about the stagecoach line?
No one has told me about a stagecoach line.
Well, they the county seat got moved from Miami to a little town called Juneau. Has anybody told you about Juneau?
Well, Mr. Chillingworth told me the reverse. He told me about the county seat being moved back down from Juneau to Miami, but it had originally been moved from Miami to Juneau?
From Miami to Juneau. And there's quite a little story in connection with that movement of that county seat that's really interesting, but I'll pass over it.
No, don't. Tell me.
Well, they had the legislature move the county seat from Miami to Juneau, and the boys from the lake, Palm Beach area, went down to Miami to get the county records and to move them up to Juneau. And the boys in the Miami area didn't take to that kindly at all. And they argued and hassled all day long about the thing. And so came supper time, it was in those days, came supper time, the local boys went home to supper and left the Palm Beach boys said they'd be back after supper. And while they were gone to supper, the Palm Beach boys loaded the county records in an Indian canoe, brought them up Biscayne Bay and up Snake Creek into the Everglades, and through the Everglades, and brought them down New River here at Fort Lauderdale, and holed up here at the House of Refuge at New River Inlet, and waited for the boys from the south end to come get them. And I'm sure glad they didn't come, because I think there'd been a real fight. And then they moved on up to Juneau. Well, obviously, the only means of transportation was by sailboat outside in the ocean. There was no inland waterway. And the transportation between the county seat of Juneau and the area in Miami was terrible. So they petitioned for a better means of transportation, and they laid out this stagecoach route, which left West Palm Beach, or it then had moved into West Palm Beach, left the west side of the lake, West Palm Beach, and left Miami left Miami about noon, and the West Palm Beach in the early morning, and they met here at Fort Lauderdale. And here at Fort Lauderdale, they established a way station for the stage, because the New River here was the only river that they couldn't bridge, and it was too deep. Back in those days, the river was very, very deep, and oh yes. And so they established this stagecoach house here, and was run by a man named Stranahan. And they would spend the night, the two stages would meet here and be ferried across, and they would spend the night here at the House of Refuge, at the stagecoach station, now called Pioneer House, and part of it is still there, by the way, yes. And then the next morning they would load on the two stages and go the other way.
Just swapping freight and packages and mail and stuff.
Right, and that was the first communication between the two cities.
Was this 2, 4, 6 horse?
I don't know, but I would assume it was probably a 4-horse affair. From I've never thought to check that up.
Single
coach.
road, single.
Oh yes, and the most fantastic. My father was one of the so-called overseers for the. I guess it would probably be now a board of county commissioners, but it was a board of overseers for the establishing of that road and the surveying bill for the laying out of that road. Of course, bear in mind that there was no paving; it was simply a laying out of a highway. The surveying bill for that, and my father told me he had seen the bill, and he was one of the people that approved the bill. Was something like $480 for the survey of the road that ran from Palm Beach to Miami. And that
you don't hardly find surveyors like that.
Not like that no more. You sure don't.
Well, now, just to go back a little for a moment on the business of moving the county seat. In the first place, this was all Dade County in those days.
Dade County was called in those days the great state of Dade. It was by long odds the biggest county in the state of Florida.
Clear up
it
to
went
where?
Up way up by Jensen.
Up by Jensen.
It was way up by Jensen and down into the northern part of the Keys. I don't think that the southern limit has changed too much when Monroe County was established, but I do know that it was went clear up by Jensen. It was called the great state of Dade, and jokingly.
Now, the legislature was then at Tallahassee?
That's right. Legislature was then at Tallahassee.
And by what manipulation would the boys up in the Juneau area and the Palm Beach and the West Palm Beach area manage to get this thing through? It just doesn't
Well,
seem logical.
you know what happens in politics
Yes, I
sometimes.
know.
I don't know. That brings to mind another quick little story if you have time about they were electing a man to the legislature in the South End here in Dade County area, or in this particular area, and it seems that there was a so-called carpetbagger running and around from Miami, and the boys cast about looking for an opponent for him, and they found a man living here in Fort Lauderdale raising pigs under the name of Pig Brown, and they persuaded Pig Brown to run for the legislature. And so they ran Pig Brown, and Pig Brown was elected. And your remark there made me think of it. And the standing joke is they don't know what happened to Pig Brown. He went through one session of legislature, and either he passed some legislation he wasn't proud of or something, because Brown never came home again.
Oh,
Some of these politicians have gone up there, I think, have often felt like they'd like to stay up now, I see, but that really happened. There's another little story about that I have about elections that might be interesting. In the Hayes election, and you spoke about one of the men talking about the Hayes election. The ballot box, the first election ever held on the lake was held in the Hayes election, and the ballot box was my grandfather's old straw hat.
oh, really?
And there were 8 people to vote. The 8 people voted, and then they got into a heck of an argument as to whether or not they should keep the polls open until sundown. There wasn't another soul within miles and miles, but there was quite a controversy went on. It wasn't an official election unless the polls were kept open until sundown. So anyway, those 8 votes were cast, and let me tell you how they sent them down to Miami. They waited for the first man that was going down to Miami, and they just gave them to him in an envelope and put it in his pocket and said, "Take these down. This is the election return."
Well, nobody waited up that night to find out what happened over the radio, did they?
No, they surely didn't.
These were fabulous days. They certainly were.
Get me started here, and I'll use
You
too
go
much
right
time.
ahead.
Has anybody told you about I imagine, so how the coconuts first came to this area?
The bark providencia?
Yeah, you probably have that story.
Well, I just want to verify it again because there are those who say it isn't so.
Oh, no, that's absolutely true. She sailed in, she left Cuba with a cargo of coconuts and wine. And whether or not her crew partook too much of part of the cargo, nobody knows, but she sailed ashore, just sailed right up in nice weather. And the ship was taken over by the settlers on a salvage basis, and they took all the coconuts ashore. The wine disappeared, and nobody's been able to find out what happened to the wine, but every now and then somebody, now, gee, I'm going to get kicked by some of these old people that have been here, but every now and then I'm told somebody showed up with a little bit of an edge on that the wine stuck around for a long time. Anyway, these coconuts were distributed and planted, and actually from there came the real start of the coconuts. That bark put the palms in Palm Beach. There's no question about that. Then later on, in many years later, a man by the name of Fields came in here, and remember Mr. Fields very well. He and another man came in here and organized a company to plant coconuts for, he was going to develop copra. And he planted coconuts all the way from Key Biscayne clear up to Palm Beach on the leased land. His coconut deal fell through, his copra deal fell through, but he certainly did leave us an awful lot of coconuts.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Of course, they didn't plant the Royal Palm Way, and those beautiful lined streets were designed a little later.
Oh, yes, they came much later. I know when Royal Palm Way was a mangrove swamp, and many of the people that you've been interviewing remember that, and that was just swamp.
It's actually Palm Beach. The whole area left something to be desired outside of the ocean front and the lakefront.
Yes, up on the ridge, and you see there was a swale back behind the ridge, particularly in the north end of Palm Beach, and there's quite a lot of swamp. And the first building in there, you've talked to Mrs. Cap Demick's daughter,
Mrs. Voss, Mrs. Enos.
Mrs. Enos.
Yes.
Cap Demick had the first hotel there, you know.
Coconut Grove House.
Yes.
I believe Mr. Flagler stayed there while he was looking over the possibility of opening up the Ponciana.
Yeah, I think so. I've heard so.
There is one point on which there is rather considerable disagreement, and I believe I can probably prove it out with the FEC because they've written a pamphlet on the building of the railroad that probably has this in. But there are a lot of people who say that the bridge across to the Ponciana was not built until after the Ponciana had been completed. Those who say it was done simultaneously, and those who say it was built so they could get the materials over to the Ponciana.
No, it was built after the Ponciana was completed.
It was.
Yes. I'm sure that many of these old timers will bear me out. I remember I have it reading it in my father's manuscript that he has written. The Ponciana materials were not only that, but the railroad wasn't into Palm Beach when the Ponciana was built. It came into Palm Beach just as it was completed, and those materials were shipped down the Indian River on those stern wheel steamers and carted from Jupiter down to Juneau on that one-horse railroad, and then picked up there and brought down to Palm Beach. And after the Ponciana was built, the bridge across the lake was established. And I'm sure when you check with the Florida East Coast Railroad, you'll find that that's exactly what happened. And of course, those were the days of the private coaches and private cars, and people would come down now in big yachts came down then in private cars. And
where in the world they stored them? They didn't have one.
On a siding over there by the hotel.
Big one.
Yes. And gee, that went on for many, many years. I can remember as a small boy seeing all these private cars stacked up over there. People come down in them. Matter of fact, the gentleman I used to work for, who used to own the First National Bank in Palm Beach, used to bring his private coach down there, even as late as in the early 30s.
Of course, the way it shaped up, it looks on the surface as though Mr. Flagler had built a railroad to connect some hotels.
Well,
Starting
yes,
at
it
St.
does.
Augustine.
Yes, he started St. Augustine, and he came down into Eau Gallie. He didn't do very much hotel building in Eau Gallie, and then came on to Palm Beach, and then from Palm Beach he built another big hotel in Miami and moved in to hook up his hotel.
And then down to Key West.
And then out on the overseas railroad.
Is there any truth to the story that it was Julia Tuttle who convinced Mr. Flagler he ought to move down to Miami?
I think so. I really think so. It was common conversation in those days.
Jesus, she must have been a character.
Yes, indeed. She's
Wonderful girl.
Oh, wonderful person. Yes,
Just see her.
indeed.
Oh, complete with her silver service and her limoges and all her fancy doodads, right, hacking it out of the mangrove jungle down there.
Going back a bit, has anybody told you what the Lake Worth, the body of water, looked like when before civilization came into it? When civilization first came into it?
No.
I think it's rather interesting because Lake Worth was a freshwater lake.
Yes.
Had no outlet to the sea, and my grandfather and my father, who was just a little boy about 11 years old, came into it from the north end on a trip, an exploring trip from Jupiter. Now that was and it was quite a deal to make that trip down to see what this lake was that they'd heard was down there.
And they have to go through swale and swamp?
They had to come back through the swamp. And they came down and came into the lake, and the lake was a beautiful body of water, wide sandy beaches and tough grass, and just full of birds and wildlife of all kinds.
Great feeding grounds.
It was a very beautiful lake, and they sailed down the lake and came down into the south end of the lake, and there they found this island, Hypoluxo Island. And it was so lovely that they didn't do a thing in the world but go on back and file a homestead on the south end of Hypoluxo Island, and took up homestead there. And my grandfather was one of the keepers of the Jupiter Light. He resigned his job and came down and took up his homestead on the south end of Hypoluxo Island.
What was his name?
Hannibal Dillingham Pierce.
Now, was he keeper to Hannibal? Was he keeper of Jupiter when
Armour?
No. Lewis Spencer's father was assistant.
I think so.
At the same time.
I think so. Something in the neighborhood, because they were very good friends.
Spencer was homesteading up north, the north end of Palm
Yeah,
Beach.
M.E. Spencer,
Yes.
Mel Spencer.
Yes.
They were very good friends. My father and Mr. Spencer were very good friends. I think perhaps it must have been My grandfather may have been keeper there sometime before Mr. Spencer, but it could have been about that same time.
What were the requirements for homesteading?
As I remember it, Mr. Hughes, you had to live on the land a certain period of time for a period of a year. Beyond that, I don't know. My father had a homestead, and you know this. It's remarkable how things change. Some of these people thought that homesteads back away from the beach were the things to have because of that salt spray and so forth. So my father homesteaded a bunch of no good pine land out here south, about west of Hypoluxo that he finally gave up because he found out it wasn't any good. And because with beach land available, but beach land wasn't too popular because it was windy and salty.
All those people, when they bought on Lake Worth, they housed on the lakeside and bought a strip to walk over where they could bathe in the ocean if they wanted to.
That's right.
If they could get through.
Going back to that lake, you know, the first inlet there was dug by hand. Somebody's told you that, I think.
Yes, I can't. Beyond Captain Dimmick, I have a hard time finding the names of any people who participated, however.
Well, Cap Dimmick, of course, was the leader of the party. He was his idea, and he was quite a forward-thinking gentleman. And there's a cute story in connection with that too. They were all camped up there, getting ready to break the thing through. What they did was they got up there and dug by hand and by mule scrapers. They dug the inlet out to right down to the high water mark. And then they waited for dead low tide, to cut it through, to get as much pressure as they could behind it, with the ocean down and the lake up. And that was going to happen early in the morning. And they had worked hard all day, and they had all turned in and were asleep in this tent. And Captain Dimmick, that thing had been, he'd been so wrapped up in the thing, and while even in sleeping, he was thinking about it. And all of a sudden, he sat up and said, "Boys, run for your lives, she's breaking through." And they all jumped up and tore out of the tent, and knocked that tent down. They thought and he was having a nightmare.
Oh, no!
One of the fellows there, I know, was an old man by the name of Upton, who was an English remittance man, lived here on the lake. I knew him, and a queer old boy, and he always lived by himself. And he was, as I say, queer. And right in the middle of the night, one night, while they were working on that inlet, Upton, out of a clear sky and dead silence, and a deep voice of his says, "Any money in coconuts?" And some fellow over the back says, "Well, open them and find out." Well, anyway, that's how the inlet got open, and they cut her through the next day, and it was opened by hand. And that thing stayed and stayed and stayed, you know.
Oh, it didn't fill up, huh?
No. The reason it didn't, because this backcountry then was quite full, way full of water all the time. There was tremendous pressure into the Everglades, because that area back there is 17 feet higher than we are down here. And as a matter of fact, the Indians say, and the old settlers quite agree, that this new river here in Fort Lauderdale broke through overnight, caused by the Everglades being so full, and this is the lowest point in the coast right here, and it just broke through. The Indians called it New River, and that is probably what happened.
The Indians apparently did nothing but scrounge and try to sell off some venison stuff. They were not unfriendly to these.
Not at all. Not at all. My father had the highest regard for some of the Indians. I have a picture. I think it's down at the office. I wished I had here to show it to you. Of 3 chiefs that had come to visit the family, and they're big, fine-looking men with turbans, like you see some of the pictures of the old Seminoles.
I've seen Billy Bowlegs.
Billy Bowlegs wears that turban. Turbans, and they had 3/4 length beaded shirts and long deerskin leggings, and fine-looking men. And I don't think that the settlers ever had any trouble with them to speak of. Once, I believe, there was a little bit of trouble caused by a vessel coming ashore up at Jupiter that was loaded with with some kind of patent medicine that was full of alcohol, and the Indians got too much of that. But by and large, I think they've always been most friendly.
What about, was there a large measure of interbreeding among the Indians and the Negro slaves that came down from Georgia?
I think so, yes. I believe there was.
I have heard, for example, of one person that I talked to claimed that Billy Bowlegs himself had Negro blood. I don't hold with that theory because Billy's too old. I mean, they were pure Indian first before the Negro came into the picture.
Billy, of course, has a mustache, and
Yes.
you don't see very many mustaches among the
right.
the Indians. There's very little hair on their faces.
Well, maybe so.
I don't know.
What did your father's family do for food? Did they have to eat off the land?
They did when they first came, and you know that's a good question, Mr. Hughes. I've asked my father that, and it's a story I love to tell. They used to beachcomb and get copper and brass off the beach, and they'd take this copper and brass and put it in, get on a sailboat and go 150 miles to Titusville to the grocery store, and they'd take that copper and brass, and there my father's first slate was bought with a piece of brass. There they'd trade that copper and brass in for the necessities of life. And I said to my dad one day, I said, well, Dad, why didn't somebody go get all that copper and brass together and corral it all? And there was no strings on it, was he? He said, no. And I said, well, why didn't somebody go out there and get the whole ball of wax and take it and load it in a boat and take it to Titusville? Well, he said, it was always there when you wanted it. There wasn't any point in cornering a bunch of it. You could always go out and get enough. And I don't think there were very many heart attacks back there in that crowd.
No.
Their homes were built. The old Pierce homestead was built out of driftwood lumber. And thereby hangs another tale. My grandfather and my mother's brother were over on the beach getting the driftwood lumber down. They brought it down and down to where the Boynton Inlet is now. It was a very narrow place there. There they'd haul it over and raft it and bring it up to Hypoluxo Island, which is just north of there. They were over on the beach. They were gone, and they were still camping on this end of the island. And a party of Indians came. You spoke of Indians a while ago. A party of Indians came and in canoes and landed just a short way up the island. There were 3 men and 2 women. And they left the 2 women there, and 3 men went on over to the mainland deer hunting. Well, my grandmother hadn't spoken to a woman in so long, and even if it was an Indian squaw, she saw a chance to talk to a woman, so she decided she'd go up and see. So she and the little boy Charlie, my father, walked up to the Indian camp, and it turned out one of these squaws could talk a little English. And so in the course of their conversation, my grandmother said, well, what name this place? And she said, Hypoluxo. And she said, what does that mean? And the Indian squaw said, it means land all around, water no get out. So that night when they got back from their chores and she told them the story, they sat around the fire and they decided, well, let's call this island Hypoluxo Island. So that's how Hypoluxo Island got its name. And it's really an Indian name.
Where did clothes come from? They have to make them, bring them down?
They brought them down and got lots of materials from wrecks. There were lots of wrecks in those days. And I think in 1872, there in the winter of 1872, there were 8 vessels wrecked between Jupiter and Hillsborough Inlet.
And somebody must have had a sewing machine handy.
Yes, of course. And every now and then they would get one of those off a wreck. Their source, one of their big source of supplies were wrecks. They used to comb the beach and walk the beach for supplies and materials.
Not like in the Key West area where they put out false lights to run them on the shore and then grab the stuff.
No.
They didn't have to do that.
That's right. That's right. But that inshore current did it for them.
Yes.
That used to, particularly in sailing vessels, it really set them ashore. And lots and lots of things. I have a sitting back here in the back end of my pool now, I have what was a water cooler, was wrecked on a stone water cooler, came from England, wrecked on a vessel called the Victor, about 1875, along in there somewhere. It's been in the family a long time. It's using it for a flower pot now.
I don't see anybody as I go up and down the coast in this area. I don't see anyone diving on those wrecks. They're still doing it down along the Keys, though.
Yes. Most of those wrecks were whatever was of value came ashore in cargo. Now down on the Keys, those boys are diving for the possibility of silver and gold, and I think the possibility is sure there too. My dad found a piece of eight, a Spanish piece of eight, right about where, right where the road turns off the boulevard, north of Manalapan, right south of the Judge Chillingworth's old place there on the beach. My dad found a piece of eight there, and got, I think, 6 cannon out of there, and they're up on the Clark estate in Palm Beach. There was
Was that one of those at the entrance there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I talked to Mrs. Clark yesterday.
Yeah. And of course they tried as best they could to see if there was anything left there, but I know doggone well if there was one piece of eight, there must have been more.
Of course, they'd have to free dive in those days, which
Yes,
was
it
a
was
difficult thing to do.
very difficult thing, and there was no way of getting down. They had an anchor from that wreck, had it out on the beach, and my father and my uncle, Mr. Voss, who's passed away now, had it up on the beach, and they went to great lengths to get that anchor out, and they left it just above the high water mark. And 2 days later, they had a hurricane, and they've never seen the anchor again.
Hurricanes in those early days, did they plague them, or were they not so heavy as they are now?
Yes, they were, but I think they at about the same intervals that we've had them now. We've had, I can remember even in my lifetime, a period of 16, 17 years without a sign of a hurricane, and people got to where they thought a hurricane was a myth until, bang, they had the 1926 one down here, followed by 28 in Palm Beach. But Dad used to tell me of seeing strips of timber leveled out in the woods. He used in hunting. He'd come across a wide swath, and he used to say, there must have been tornadoes down here in those days. We don't have any tornadoes to speak of in Florida now, but he has told me a number of times. Yeah, they had one in Milton, didn't they?
Well, I don't know how we battened down so and treated as though the major disaster of the era was imminent. I just don't know how they withstood it in those comparatively rickety buildings.
Well, that's true. My father's introduction to Jupiter was in the middle of a hurricane, and they rode it out underneath my father and my grandmother and grandfather rode it out underneath overturned surfboat north of Jupiter. My grandfather got it up on the shore, on the beach. They were coming down inland, and turned her bottom up and lashed it down, and they got under it and rode the hurricane out there. That was their introduction.
Mr. Charles Pierce, Part 2. Now, did your grandfather and grandmother and mother and father all come at the same time?
No, my grandfather and grandmother and my father came from Chicago. Then they came in an interesting way. They came down the Mississippi River by boat. They bought it right after Chicago fire. They came down the Mississippi River in this boat, and they were going to sail it around the tip of Florida and bring it back up the East Coast and seek their fortune. And they came to New Orleans, and then came from New Orleans to Cedar Keys. When they got to Cedar Keys, the people over there, it was about hurricane season, and the people over there talked them out of it, said, it's terribly dangerous. So they sold the boat there and came across by rail to Jacksonville.
Oh, on that little Key West
AT&T and KW, yeah. And then down the St. John's River to Palatka, and then by stage overland to Sands Point. It wasn't Titusville then, it was Sands Point. And there, civilization stopped. From there south, and that's 200 miles from Miami. There wasn't a thing except the lighthouse at Jupiter. That was in 1872.
And where'd your father catch up to your mother?
My mother came from Key West. My mother was raised in Key West, and my father met her in Miami. She came up there teaching school.
What was her name?
Her name is a peculiar name. Her name was Wallach, Yallis Wallach, an English name, Wallack, and she was born in Yallis Valley in Jamaica.
Oh.
And that's where Yallahs. 2 summers ago, I went to Jamaica and went down in the Yallis Valley. But that's where she was born. Her mother was, they were at some sort of a coffee raising place down there.
How long did she teach school in Miami?
I don't recall. Not too long. Not too many. Only just a couple of years, I think. And
Well,
of course,
sir?
I have the very dubious honor of being the first white child born in Boynton Beach.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, can't hardly tell what's going to happen.
Never know more.
I'm grateful to you, sir, for talking to me at some length. And gosh, you have filled us in on a lot of things.